It's going live. Yeah, there we are. Okay, we're up.
All right.
Yahoo. Well, thanks everybody for coming. We're gonna have a really fun conversation here, but before we do, there's a couple of quick housekeeping things. If you're having any issues with connectivity, if you're getting pauses or freezes, set your screen resolution to 720, which you can do in the bottom right hand corner under settings. Set that video resolution to 720. We'll make things smoother for you. And also don't forget to participate in the polls and the capsules and all the other fun things that are going on in the breakout rooms, and visit folks in their vendor booths. All right. So anything else before we get started? I think we're good. Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. So I'm Todd. This is Wim. Hopefully some of you know who we are, I hope. And we've got Clay and Doug here from the Claris team. And why don't we let's just have Clay give a brief introduction and then Doug do that as well.
Yeah, I'm Clay Maeckel. I've been working at Apple since '86, and though Andrew in the earlier talk this morning, he's probably been working on a FileMaker longer than I. I've been at Claris longer than him. We had other products before FileMaker, but that's over 30 years ago, so don't need to worry about that. But I was part of the core team that came up with the Draco engine, and I'm still working on that. I guess I think my title is like the FileMaker software architect. I'm not really working on the Claris Studio side as much. I'm not worried about that part. I'm mainly more concentrating on the Draco engine and the products built off that.
Great. Doug?
Cool. So good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending where you're on the planet. So my name is Doug Wallis. I'm part of the product management team. I essentially work on the server cloud, been on Pro. Been at Claris for about 8 years now. Used to be where we had the SE team. So like if you know Ronnie Rios, we used to work for Andy Locates. My job essentially is to make sense of what the engineers come sort of create so that we can actually put it in the product and try to explain how to people to actually use it. Don't fool you because I've got a Scottish name. I'm actually half French, half British, hence the accent for those who don't understand. Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, why don't we kick off with we've got some new things coming in 19.6. We're going to focus on transactions here, I think, for the most part. But is there anything else with what is going to be coming for the next release of FileMaker, which is we just got 19.5.2. Now we're going to 19.6 sometime in the, I don't know, not too distant future, I guess.
Clay, so we've So we're kind of working on various sort of new stuff. One of the things that we're trying to really do on the FileMaker side of it is we have the policy of trying to actually get the performance, stability, and reliability of the server to be as top as we can. So we put a lot of effort into getting basically server to work the best as we can, so that you as developers have actually less friction with the whole system. So with 19.5 that just released, we added like parallel backups. And one of the things we actually did work on was adding the Nginx web server inside the FileMaker server. And one of the things we're trying to actually get to is actually make it easier for people to actually get more users, especially on WebDirect, because we know there's a lot of demands to be able to actually host solutions on WebDirect. So a lot of the work that we're actually doing there is essentially on getting this whole sort of side of the system to actually work better. And then one of the new features that you'll see in 19.6 is around the transactions. So we've had kind of, in a weird way, transactions inside of FileMaker for quite a long time, but we never really sort of opened it that much to developers to be able to actually sort of play around with it. So based on, and you'll hear us basically sort of Claris people saying again and again and again, a lot of the decisions we actually make on adding new products to the platform is based on the feedback. So through emails that we get from partners, through calls that we have with partners or developers, we get your feedback, and basically we actually try to work on that. And opening a transaction is really coming from a lot of demand from developers like you, Todd, and they've done a lot of stuff around it, of seeing is how we can actually sort of make it easier for you developers to play around with transaction. And essentially what transaction is going to, well, the 3 script steps I've actually created. One is an open transaction, one is a commit transaction, and the last one is revert contraction, is going to be able to actually let you get a bit more control of how the data is being sent between the client side of it and the server. There's going to be some caveats around it. It's not going to change the way you do your scripts. It's going to really change the way you look at FileMaker. It's just going to give you, in some areas, more freedom in what you can do. So that was basically one of the things we sort of wanted to go about, sort of explain the transaction side of it. It's not replacing everything inside it. It's just basically giving you more tools to make your life a lot easier. When I was looking on some of the forums and I was talking to some developers, they had a vision maybe transaction could help them do a offline synchronization. It's not going to help you actually do that because the way that it works. If you have, I mean, like everything is, if you want to do a lot of stuff around transactions and you're not part of the ETS, just send us an email at ets@claris.com, and then we can add you to the ETS. You can start playing with it, and then you can give us feedbacks on what you think we should do differently, or what doesn't work, and how we basically put it out to the market when it comes out in the next update of 19.6. Clay, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, it's the low-level transaction logic that's going on, how FileMaker handles or executes transactions and stuff like that is pretty much remaining the same. So that's why that's why we can't do the things like Doug mentioned, that you do more offlining stuff using this stuff. Pretty much we've done is we've given you a lot more control of when the decision points are done for doing transactions. If you've gone to Todd's sessions at previous DevCons and stuff like that, he's gone through a lot of things explaining how this works. You have a window, so there's a window, and then when a record becomes active, when you type the first character, then the lock, that's kind of the start of the transaction when the first lock goes out, and then it remains open, and then magically it gets committed or reverted depending on what happens. And there really wasn't much fine control for developers over that. You pretty much had to know when users were clicking in and out, and and if you were doing the scripting, you'd say, oh, I need to do I want to start a transaction. Well, let's enter a record first, and then if you wanted to combine multiple things together in one transaction, so you had to really go off and start putting a bunch of relationships together because you could only have one active record. And you could do all this stuff, but it was really complex and pretty not very obvious how to do things. This makes things a lot clearer and cleaner inside the scripting engine. And I know people are going to try wacky things with these new transactions with, in the user model. And, they always do with any new feature we have. You say, oh, you actually did that? Oh, I brought up a web viewer and then forced data direct to make a call to, some SQL statement. And then, I commit they're going to come up with, some mousetrap thing that's pretty amazing probably. But the more intended use is, okay, the user's been doing some things, and okay, I need to make a bunch of changes that have to be all committed together. I need to edit these 3 records in this table, these 4 records over there, and I need to delete some of this stuff, and I want to make sure that that's all done in one chunk and guarantee that it's all done in one chunk. So you can script it. You'll use the first script step to start transaction, do all your operations, and then do the commit at the end, and then all that stuff will be glued together, and you don't have to worry about making relationships to all the different tables and making sure they're all connected to the current record. I guess another big thing is it's still using the same. So the old style transactions, every window has its own transaction object. It's the thing that's recording everything going on. So each window is independent, and it is still that way here. So these new script step transaction script steps don't span multiple windows. I mean, I think technically you could have 2 transactions open in different windows, each one's acting independently. So this is still very ScriptMaker context sensitive. It is that the current window is the important part. So the script is executing in that window, on that window, and accessing data from that window. And then now you can switch layouts and all this stuff and get to other tables, but it's all very window context sensitive based at that point. So we're basically just giving you a lot more control over the start point and end points of transactions now. So you know exactly when it's occurring, as opposed to whether a certain field is active or not. That's how I basically see the main change for it.
Yeah, I mean, I can just to maybe give a little color to the kind of setups you have to do now to pull off these multi-table edits. You can't leave a window, but you also can't leave a layout, right? So the whole way you do transactions today in the current shipping product is you go to one record on a layout and you hold that record open and you edit all the other records that you want to change through relationships. And then when you commit the active record, all of those other changes are committed. That works, but you cannot leave the layout. And so what that means is you have to have special schema set up to do any kind of transaction. If you want to be able to touch every, different tables in your database, you're going to have extra schema in place to do that. So what I think most people do if it's a very complex system is they will create a special table occurrence group or oftentimes a special file where you do all of your transactional scripting. And there's one base table that is sort of the record that holds everything else open. And then all of your other tables are connected and just a big kind of anchor buoy, but buoy at the top and all these anchors at the bottom maybe. And so that's how you do it today. That's how I most commonly see it done. And it works, but it's an incredible amount of ceremony to pull this off. And that's, to me, what I see here with these new steps is that I really don't need to do that anymore. I do not need a separate context for a separate table occurrence group or a separate file to do transactions. And so that's really great because I can switch layouts, which lets me switch contexts and update records, delete records, do all that stuff without having to have that whole mass of extra weight on my schema.
Yep, I really like what Clay was saying about the old style not being obvious, and the new one is very obvious. It's just a set of script steps that we have to our that we have available now. When I looked at it, it's almost, to me, reminded me a little bit of getting the script triggers, right? It doesn't mean that all of a sudden we'll completely re-architect and redo our solutions in a transactional way, because we can. That's not really the purpose of this, right? It's more, if you need a transaction, you can do it now more cleanly than you could before. And you could do a little more, like what Todd was saying. You can switch between parent records, which you couldn't do before. You can change layouts. You can do a bunch of stuff more easily controlled while maintaining your transaction and then committing or reverting. But it's not a paradigm shift in the way that we build our solutions. It doesn't mean that it's not important. It's hugely important because it makes it a whole lot more obvious and simpler for anybody to get into transactions.
Yeah, I think if you have this stuff built in now, the way we're going to, then I can start writing transaction code much earlier in a system than I might normally, because it might be a very simple system that I'm building. And if in the old style, I would have had to bring in all of this other stuff just to get a transaction to work. But in a new system, in this new way, I might be building a very simple solution that just needs a single transaction. Now I can easily do it without bringing a whole bunch of stuff in there, which adds weight to in terms of performance, but also mental capacity weight that just shouldn't be necessary. So this seems really great to me.
The old way of doing it took a lot of debugging. Right?
Yeah.
You had to very carefully step through that to make sure that at no point were you doing something that would trigger a commit.
Right.
Whereas now you don't have to worry about that. Well, a little bit, like switching windows and that kind of stuff. Yeah. But other than that, you know that you'll commit when it's time to commit, and you don't have to worry about maintaining that suspended state.
Yeah, unintended go to layout could cause you a lot of grief in the current system.
That's right.
Yep.
Doug, were you going to say something?
Yeah. So I was going to say is, so I was looking at on the community. There's like people basically either like the idea of being able to actually do transactions. I've seen other developers, and I've talked to a few that kind of scares them, because if you're doing your script properly, and if you're doing basically all your logic and you're following you have like a logic that you follow when you're doing your scripts, kind of works. But if you're basically going to think that those new script steps are going to basically make your system quicker, they're going to basically make everything faster and safer and whatever, I'd say there's a lot of basically of testing that's going to have to be done by a lot of developers to make sure they don't actually sort of mess up the whole system. Because once you basically go into this sort of user script steps, as long as you're not actually committing the transaction, it's just basically staying in the cache, and you can actually be lost
Slower.
if you have whatever problem. So this is one of the reasons we're trying to actually start talking about those new script steps way early before it actually comes to the market, to really get people to actually say, if you like, I mean, pretty much asking anyone basically in community is, if you're not part of the ES, come and join, play with it, give us the feedback of how you're actually using it, because when it comes to the market, the biggest fear that that I have on this type of stuff, that it's very advanced, and if a junior developer uses the wrong way, you could actually mess up a bit of your data. So we want to make sure that whatever context we give out, whatever information, documentation, we properly sort of explain to people how it should be used, and through the community be able to say, hey, by the way, we've seen people doing this and that doesn't really work. So
I couldn't agree more, because Claris obviously cannot test every single solution that's out there, or even every intended use of the platform. So being yes, and being able to make your own assumptions about does it have a performance impact, yes or no, I think that's critical, crucial.
Yeah, I would
and-
say, I mean,
and
a really good point is that you don't, I don't think the intent shouldn't be that you just wrap all of your scripts with start transaction, end transaction. That's going to be a problem. You need to understand what transactions are actually used for, why they're a thing that you might need in certain circumstances, and apply that logic when that's required. But you don't need a transaction for everything. It's not required, and it's not a magic, pixie dust. You sprinkle about your solution, and suddenly everything's going to work different, and you're going to have less bugs or whatever. No, you actually need to understand what a transaction is and what it means when it reverts, for example, when it's not completed, when somebody gets disconnected from the network or whatever it is. You have to understand all that stuff. And then the basic idea is that if you don't commit that transaction, it's not going to make it, right? So it's not going to make it to the data. It's going to be lost, which is what you want in some cases, but not what you want in others. So you have to understand all that stuff, which I think is what I'm hearing you say, Doug. So you have to give this some thought. This is not magic pixie dust, right?
Yeah.
And
also,
also,
we were talking, there with. Sorry. Go ahead,
okay. Yeah, talking about the performance stuff is, we do know that if the join graph has a lot of extra stuff that's not needed in there, that does slow down the opening process of dialogues and stuff like that. So getting rid of extra layouts and getting rid of extra join graph entries that aren't needed anymore will just speed up your solution in general. So that helps quite a bit. And I did notice a question from Hansa saying that, is there a limit of the number of changes that can be in a single transaction? And technically, no. FileMaker, when we do imports, we usually imports, when you do an import from a large file and stuff like that, we don't put everything into one transaction and then just do the commit at the end. We break up into, I think, transactions of 500 records at a time. So, and I think Replace does stuff like that too. What you would see if you start putting a large number of records in there is that when that commit occurs, you're going to see a long delay at that point as all the stuff gets uploaded at that point. So basically what happens is when the commit happens, this transaction object that's hanging to the window is keeping track of which tables and which databases and which hosts actually. Remember, commits can cross multiple hosts in addition to just multiple tables, because you can have external data sources pointing to different hosts at the same time. So the transaction code has to package up everything. Okay, I need to send these records to this host. I need to send these records to that host for this table. And then start sending, and then once all those things are uploaded, then it goes around and starts telling all the hosts, okay, I've uploaded all the data. You have it on your machine now. Now start actually committing them to the real database at that point. And these uploads are just doing the standard style uploads of when we're uploading and downloading records too. It's just all chunks of the whole HBAM tree that are going up and down. It's not it's moving the same large chunks around that it moves everything else around, like container data and stuff like that. So there really is no limit to the size, but your user experience may not be very optimum if you're saying, oh, okay, I just want to do one commit at the end of the day. I don't want, I don't want any users changes done until, they're gone or something like that. You have this long wait at the end. So it's really, it's like what Todd was saying. You really have to understand what you're using the transaction for and why, when you may want to revert, when you may not want to revert, what is the purpose of it, and look into that.
Well, I just throw out some quick numbers. I did some testing on like how many records I could slam into a transaction with a very large database file, and it does seem to be it's going to start slowing things down when your RAM fills up, but you can fill it up. I mean, at least this was a number of years ago, but I had a billion records in a file, and I was loading hundreds of thousands of them into a transaction at a time, and it would just get really slow. In that test, I discovered up to about 50,000, and after 50,000, it just got ridiculously slow. But so yeah, you just got to watch for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that transaction object has parts that are RAM based inside of it that's associated with each window. It's keeping these lists of records that are part of the transactions and the list of hosts and tables and stuff like that. So it's not all disk based. Now, all the textual the size of the records probably shouldn't matter, but the count probably will.
Yeah, that's what it seemed to me anyway. And it's just anecdotal.
Yeah, that makes sense for how. Yeah, those are memory based read lists that are occurring in there. These bitmaps that I was talking about. In a different session.
I was going to say we could spend several hours on this, but we are short on time. I wonder if we should. Is that right? We only have 4 minutes left. Yeah, so 4 or 5 minutes. So I wonder if we should just like walk through how a transaction would work today in terms of what happens if an error has occurred. Somebody when you guys want to tackle that? Like what are the script steps that happen? Should we go there? Or I can throw out my
maybe you say what it says, because
all right, so
it's changed with for the last 3 months I haven't been looking at it, and this is one thing that's nice about having feedback from the ETS people. People have been giving us feedback of how we do error handling and what things should return errors and which ones don't, and I haven't really been up to date with the most recent changes of it, but this is a good reason to give us feedback, because
this is actually important, right?
Yeah, because while the base transaction entry points and exit points are the same, error handling is probably one of the areas that we probably will, even if you get it right now, it will probably change before 19.6 actually comes out, as we get comments back from you guys.
Yeah. So what happens now, and this because the feedback's important here, and this is one of the tricky areas you can hit right away is you start a transaction and then the scripts continue to work through the steps. And if you come to a script step that encounters an error, and it's an error that has to do with database values, like there's certain errors that aren't going to trigger this, but if you set a field with the wrong type or something like that, or it's a field missing or something like that, or the record is locked by somebody else, it's actually going to skip to the close transaction step, and it's going to skip all the steps in between, and it's going to give you the error. Like say it was a record lock, would say 301 would be the error that you'd get at that point, but you don't actually know which. Currently, at least in the last build that I looked at, you don't actually know which script step actually triggered that. And that's one of the tricky things right now that we're trying to get right, is how do we deal with that? And I think a number of people have asked for, can we get back the line number of the script that actually caused the error, or some other information about the error. And then that script will not commit. It will revert, because it was essentially said, we cannot do what you've asked us to do without breaking the transaction. So you're going to have to throw it out, essentially. So that's how it works right now, I believe. I think do I have that about right?
Yep, you have that right. And Clay and Doug were asking about feedback, and that's exactly one of the areas that we need lots of feedback on, because there's different schools of thought on how to handle that. Like, should it not fall through, and should it try all the things so that it can give you a unified list of all the errors that it would have encountered? So there's different ways that we can think about that and come up with a good response from the community.
But I actually really do love the fact that it skips all the steps. I mean, now is a lot less. Again, it's about reducing the boilerplate and the amount of ceremonial code we have to bring in to track this stuff. And so this is really going to reduce the number of lines of code we have to write to pull this off. So I encourage people to RN ETS to try it, and others who want to get an ETS and try it, and help get this feature right, because it is kind of a foundational feature for doing certain types of database operations.
Absolutely.
Well, the validation logic on the logging. The
validation logic occurs in. You're stepping over in it, but
I'll pick Clay, and then we'll go to Doug.
Okay, but the validation logic occurs in multiple stages. There's validation errors that occur when you exit a particular field.
Yeah.
But then there's a whole batch also that only occur at the point that the record gets committed. Right. So that's why you'll see some errors. You say, oh, why didn't I get an error? Because this is clearly an invalid thing in the record. But because that check isn't done until the commit time for things like I forget, like the calc-based stuff, I think is done
Yep.
at the commit time, not when you change records and stuff like that. So getting when these errors happen and when they, so even with validation, it depends on the validation at what point they'll trigger the error or pop you out of the transaction. And I'll give it over to Doug now so I can shut up.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the thing is, the idea with the feedback is that if we actually need to actually modify how the script steps, or even basically put an option where basically before you're able to actually do anything on the transaction, there's a log being created in the background so that users can actually track everything that's going, then it's something we can actually look into. Yeah, but definitely, yeah, more feedback, more information for us, easier to be able to actually give you what you need at the end of the day and get something that actually works for you and not really for us.
Yeah,
For
it's
sure.
really great. This is again sort of just in the direction that you guys have been laying out about what you're trying to do, accomplish with the whole platform. You're going to allow us to do more with less, which is really what it comes down to. We're still going to be solving complex problems, but we're going to be able to do it with less steps, less script steps. In this case, is a very sort of clear and obvious thing, but it's definitely part of this whole transition to a more platform and powerful whole platform, really.
Yep, absolutely.
I think we're about out of time, but I do want to mention that Danny Mac, is who I learned about transactions from first years ago back in Boulder, and he's going to be giving a talk on transactions sort of now and in what they might look like in the future. And that is tomorrow. Check your schedules for that. So if you want to learn from one of the OGs in this field, Danny's the man.
Yep.
So make sure you check that out.
And one other session is actually the second part of Carl from Soliant is doing a session on under the hood remote calls. So some of that stuff is interesting there too.
All right. Well, thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it. And hope you all out there enjoyed this talk. It's certainly great to hear from the folks who are affecting the changes actually at the keyboard level on the code base back there. So thanks so much for being a part of this.
Absolutely. Thanks.
And thanks to you for actually getting all of that organized. It's brilliant.
All right.